Hi, everyone. Welcome to All the Forbidden Things. This is the podcast where we talk about all the things we're not talking about. So, things like race, gender, generation, and the way that those affect us in a very personal way, some of the perceptions we have of each other. And we also find out the misperceptions that we have of each other. And the way that we do this is through a very special format where we ask a question we ultimately want to answer, but we want the other person to guess at first. For example, what do you think my favorite color is? Actually, what do you think my favorite color?
I feel like it's like a purpley red.
It is. Oh my God. Why do you think that?
Like that's your energy. You have like a burgundy
That
vibe.
is my favorite color. Wow. Okay, great. So you see how satisfying that was. All right. I have known Laurie since we were in chorus about starting 2 years ago.
Yeah, probably coming up on 2 years.
Yeah.
I think.
And for the first year while we were in chorus, I don't think we really connected. And then last
Well,
well,
last night we got drunk together on the
yeah, we
last
did. We
night.
got drunk together at like the cast party, if you will. And then we started talking about life and dating and generational gaps. We had a few party crashers. Um, and one of the things that struck me in the conversation that we had was how shocking it was, how negative some of your experiences are. And I was like, are we going backwards in feminism? Like, what did my generation do wrong that you guys are in this position now? So we really kind of want to explicitly, you're going to hear my dog in the background potentially. I'm so sorry if you don't. She has a lovely voice. Um,
She could be in the
and
choir with us.
yes,
frankly.
exactly. She's one of the first
She's a soprano.
sopranos.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, so I was shocked by how badly your lives have turned out. And what did we do wrong that you're not having positive experiences in the world? And also, we've just connected about a lot of things like that. And you're a little bit of a mini me. So tell everyone your age.
I'm 23.
And I'm 35. So we are not the same age. And that's lovely. So also, I had a friend tell me that I needed to make friends with younger people because otherwise I'd be an old fart. And
And then you made friends with me?
he's not an old fart. No, it
Oh,
was
okay.
after that. But as I was like starting to be like, oh, I'm making these friends with Gen Z. Is that weird? And he's like, no, otherwise you'll be an old fart. Anyways, so we are gonna start off. You're gonna ask the very first question.
Oh my God.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, so the way this works is I ask you a question that I ultimately want to answer for myself,
Yes.
sort of thing. Okay. Love that. I think like definitely my biggest question is what sort of role has social media played in your life in general, really, but like
In your
really
life.
in my life?
Yes.
Oh, what role do you think social media see? Like I barely know
It
what's
takes
going
a
on.
little while to get used to.
Yeah, it's like everything's backwards. Um, yeah, what role do you think social media plays in my life, particularly when it comes to self-esteem and self-image, relationships, and also career prospects?
Okay. So I do know a little bit. We have had a bit of a conversation about this. So I know a little bit about, and I think you're actually curious about that with me. So you can ask me that back. But um, I know a little bit about sort of like self image and friendship. So you've talked in the past about how, like, growing up, everything was online. Social connections at school were
Mm-hmm.
online. You weren't really you didn't really have friends if you didn't have friends online. Right.
Yeah.
And like everything was processed online that had happened during the day, et cetera, et cetera. Um, I think that your self esteem I think that your inner self esteem, such as like how lovable you think you are or whatever in the world, is separate. I think that is your own. But I do think that you're, you have an absolutely seamless at this point because it's so long had and so grown up with, but level of filtering and monitoring and curating of of your presentation, of your way of moving through the world, of everything. Like you have a curated self probably that is blended naturally with who you really are, but is like maybe more curated than I grew up having. Um, in terms of relationships, I think you might have the phenomenon, and if somebody doesn't have a cool social media profile, you might lose interest. You're like, oh my god, their life looks so lame, and like I totally thought this was a different guy. Um, and then I think you in your career, so because you are a visual artist, an illustrator, I think that you probably have a lot more opportunities because of social media, because you can put your work out there and people can actually see it and you can network with them better. So that's what I think.
Okay, now I tell you
Yeah,
the
you tell me the
realities.
reality.
Okay. Yeah, so we have kind of had a conversation about this like months and months ago when we went out one night. We were talking about it. Um, First I'll talk about like social media in terms of like relationships and stuff, and like also a little bit of self-image, because I think that those two things are like actually pretty closely tied. Because yeah, kind of like what you said about like we're judging partners and stuff on social media. It's like we're judging everyone on social media. And something interesting that I heard someone say once. It was like I was watching another podcast or something, and they were talking about should you be on dating apps or not, and like do you need dating apps and everything. And someone responded by saying like, no, you don't need dating apps. Instagram. We all have Instagram. Why do you need a dating app? Instagram is the dating app. So it's like, yeah, my public profile is sort of this version of myself that I'm curating and putting out there of like, hey, I want to be perceived like this. I did a really interesting experiment recently. I took a screenshot of my feed and gave it to Chat GPT and said, what is your first impression of me based on my Instagram feed? It was so cool too, because they were like, you're fashionable, you're artistic and everything.
ChatGPT's figured out your personality.
Oh, I know.
It's like,
Just
I
from
gotta
a just
flatter
from a
this girl.
screenshot of my Instagram, but you can also ask it to be mean.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I
No,
asked
you
it to be
totally
mean,
can.
and it was like, this looks very scripted. Maybe you should have some more genuine moments, like you're trying too hard. And I was like, I took that with a grain of salt, because that's all that social media is just something scripted, something where people are trying too hard, something where I'm telling a story that I want you to believe about me. Um, and it is very hard. I think the most difficult thing is the discrepancy between that story I'm telling online and my actual self. Because I kind of think of it like the way that maybe a celebrity like handles publicity, what they want publicized or not. And like, if we're going to talk about like something that we can reference through a longer period of time, not just what's on social media, is like you can choose what to put out there. Of course, that's not like a nuanced take that, oh, you can like choose what to put out there so people like only see the good sides and everything. Like that's not a new thing that I'm saying, but like it is very damaging still. Like not only to my perception of self, but also my perception of other people, especially people I don't know. I will have extreme negative feelings and like I don't know, issues with people where I see their social media and let's say they look really cool and they're really hot. They're like a beautiful lady, especially. And then I like get these jealous feelings of like, oh, her life is so cool. Why isn't my life like that? Even though I know like I'm scripting a life as well on here.
She's
It's
just
like
better at PR.
maybe, or maybe like she's exactly where I am, it doesn't matter because I'm biased because I know my side. Like I know not only the story I'm telling on there, but I also know within myself what's true. But I don't know that about anyone else. And social media feels so real, especially after COVID and everything, where social media was everything. I mean, no one was doing anything interesting, but it was like the digital world was more real than the real world. And it was like whoever you are on Instagram is more real than who you are in real life a lot of the times. Like your Instagram is your dating profile, it's your resume, it's your portfolio. It's like it's your entire self as other people are going to perceive it, and that's a very bad thing. I
Mhm.
think,
Mhm.
because it creates so many unrealistic expectations. Like, and this happens like with guys that I find on there as well. Like, I
Mhm.
find myself idolizing or fantasizing about men online when they're presenting me something false.
Yeah, I
And that
remember that
creates like
guy that was in
false
another
dating
city.
expectations. Yeah, no, I was really obsessed with this. We don't got to talk about it. Embarrassing.
We've all
Um,
done it.
we've all been there. I'm still in love with him. It's okay.
It's fine. They'll get
Um,
together eventually.
one day. I say, well, I have a beautiful, loving relationship right now. Anyway, um, so yeah, I think like it's really a damaging place in terms of self-perception, self-esteem, self-image. It's like it's definitely a skill that you have to learn growing up, and as your frontal lobe develops, that the online world is not the real world, but at the same time, the online world is so important now that it feels like the real world and it's becoming the real world, but it can never be what's actually real. But it's like, it's a trap. I don't know, like it's never going to be a safe space that like is safe for my mind where I feel comfortable with my imperfections or
Yeah.
anything. It doesn't let you be the full scope of human.
Do you feel like, I think we talked about this a little bit, and I can't even remember exactly what your answer was, but do you feel like that translates into your real life, that you are curating actual conversations and the way that you move through the world?
Like, does that affect?
How authentic? So let's say none of us are absolutely authentic online because we don't even know how to be, honestly.
Mhm.
But are you? Does that make you less authentic potentially in real life as well?
I think it totally can. I don't know about me personally. Like, I don't perceive myself.
No, you seem very.
I don't know. I feel like it depends. So I feel like that gets into an interesting territory of like when we have all these sort of perfect portrayals of people online where they see the sides of like we see the sides of their lives that they want us to see and everything. And then we meet them in person and we see these faults in them. We hyperfixate on those faults.
Mhm.
Because it's like it feels like a lie almost.
Mm,
It feels like,
like you
oh,
sold
this is
me.
like, yeah,
I want to
like
take this back to the store.
yeah, yeah, it was like, again, we're all like telling a story with social media and everything. And like when you sort of meet the actual person behind that and see the full scope of their person, you're like, oh, you're not confined to exactly what you were showing me. I feel like you're not who you said you were. And then you get really critical. I had an interesting experience with this. I went on a date with an influencer who's like, first, he's like a horny influencer. Like he's got OnlyFans, he does Quinn audios, he
Oh yeah, I heard that.
yeah, he does like these videos where he's like, I'm a boy and I read smut and stuff. And I went on a date and I
The
asked him
perfect
about it.
impression.
Yeah. I went on a date and I asked him about it and he was like, oh yeah, I read like a section of a smut book once to see what girls like. And he like just read the sex part and I'm like, you're missing the point. And he was kind of racist and
Nice.
misogynist and I was just like, you're not like the super feminist sex object I was expecting.
I have so many feelings about that. So, guys, I feel like in the last like 5 years or so have figured out how to be. This one guy I went out with once called it, he was like, you have such a high EQ, emotional quotient. And I'm like, you are the same womanizers that have been existing forever, but now you're using therapy to get us into bed.
Okay, that's crazy. That's actually shocking. Using therapy to get us into bed is insane.
It is real.
Well, that's wow. I haven't experienced that. I haven't experienced
Maybe it's a
anyone
generational
very
thing.
emotionally intelligent. So-
Okay, now I got more questions. Yeah.
okay.
Oh,
got
no,
more
you
question?
can keep
Oh,
going.
okay,
But
okay.
that's giving me an idea.
I was just gonna like my sort of putting a bow on it point was like it contributes a lot, I think, to cancel culture and like why that kind of exists. It's like we don't see each other as complete humans anymore. Like we only see like a caricature. I'm thinking like a little like when in Disney World where the guy comes out dressed out as Mickey Mouse, it's like we're expecting fucking Mickey Mouse. And then we go backstage and he takes off the hat and he's like Carl. But I mean Carl's still Mickey Mouse. He plays Mickey Mouse in Disney World, but like that's who the fuck is Carl? You
Oh
know?
no.
Like, and then you're mad. You're like, you're not Mickey Mouse. Like the joyful little rodent that I love.
Yeah.
You have a mortgage. Like,
Well, and what's so funny is that like that when you're like, "Oh, you lied to me," in a sense, like you're mad at the person for who they really are instead of the fact that their profile is wrong. You're like, "Oh, I really want Mickey Mouse. Like, I can't believe you're not Mickey Mouse." Instead
yeah.
of like, "I can't believe you presented yourself as Mickey Mouse. That was really unfair."
Yeah.
It's more like, "Ew, how disappointing you are."
Yeah.
Yeah, it's rough.
Yeah. And
It's
I mean,
really
like,
rough.
sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes, like, there's just figures like that we look up to. Like, okay, a recent person who got canceled who was pretty big was Cody Ko. Did you hear about all that? Are you familiar
No.
with any of that?
No,
Okay,
tell
for
me.
my Gen Z people out there. Cody Ko's just like a basically a reaction YouTuber. He got like really big for his series that he did called That's Cringe a few years ago with his buddy Noel Miller. And he reacted to a lot of like dating show stuff that was like YouTube dating shows like The Cut, things like The Button and all that. He recently got canceled because it came out that like when he was 25 he knowingly had sex with someone who was 17, a minor, in both of their states, so like it was super and all of that. But I think like I don't know, that just goes to say like he portrayed himself as like someone who is really with the girls. He's for the girls. He's with the feminists. He's got a wonderful wife named Kelsey. They have a child together. His life has been very public. And so seeing this other side of him was like so strange. And it doesn't matter. I'm not saying I'm on his side or anything, but like let's say he has reflected on that and has changed or something, it doesn't matter.
Well, this is the thing is you are permanently determined by what you did when you were like 20 years old or what you did when
Yeah.
and then people who make the argument of like let's say famous people who are like, well, that was a long time ago and it was a different time, which that's a terrible argument, but also
Mhm.
that there's a truth to that I don't know if we've talked about it a little bit, but where like you live in a world where things don't occur to you, where things are known to be funny, where things are known to be done, and you don't know that there are rules that exist that you're breaking. And
Yeah.
it's like you're responsible for that, but on some level, you're also not responsible for the lack of evolution you had at the time, whatever it is. But sometimes it's
Yeah.
just pure like youthful, and I'm not saying that about him, but sometimes
Mhm.
if you misstep in something you say, it's like pure youthful idiocy, and
Yeah.
you can be stuck
I
for all
think
time.
I think maybe that was a pretty also extreme example that I gave. Like that's kind of like a sexual
Right. I'm just
assault,
saying like a
statutory rape.
separately from him.
Yeah. So the girl in question, like, she literally runs a podcast called Cancelled because she herself has been canceled so many times,
Okay,
and
so
like she
this
has
is
like
interesting.
all these racist tweets always resurfacing and stuff like that, and it's like it's very interesting. Like again, she's getting canceled and all that. People are saying like, no, we don't like her, we're not with her. Whereas like in person, let's say one of my dear friends found some racist tweets that they made when they were like, like 5, 7, 10 years ago, whatever. I've probably done that because I was a stupid 12-year-old. Um, it's like that would be something like between me and my friends where we'd be like, haha, that's so stupid, but I know you, I know
Your
you're grown
heart
from
and
that.
your intelligence now.
Yeah, and it's like I see them as full people, whereas like anyone else who kind of makes that mistake, like if anything negative about you gets out that isn't the story that you're portraying online, I mean, you're done.
Yeah, it's
Even
really
though,
hard.
like, the reality is that like we're all good and bad
Yes.
at the same time.
Yeah, it's true. And when you're showing so much of your life and you're so authentic and you're so presenting out there, you're going to trip over yourself at times. Like you're
Yeah.
going to say things that are just later you're like, why did I think that?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so I have a question for you.
Yeah.
This
I was
is
like, it's been 20 minutes. What you mean by
no, this is it was a great
Okay.
discussion. The point is not the questions; it's what we find out.
That's okay.
Um,
Beautiful.
So the I want to know. Okay, so I think you kind of wanted to know whether I have an experience with social media that affects me and whether, like, do you think that I have a similar experience of any of that? Or do
Mhm.
you think that is markedly different from me or my generation?
Yeah, I was yeah, that's definitely a curiosity that I have because social media for you, damn, you would have been like in college or something when that came
Late
out?
high school.
Late high school? Yeah, so yeah, for me it's like that social media started I was on Instagram when I was 11 years old and stuff like that. Like crazy developmental time. Can you imagine
I was
Instagram
getting
in middle
bullied
school?
when I was 11 years old. I don't want to think
I was
about
getting
it.
bullied online. There was no escaping it. Like you get kind of honestly like I wouldn't get any shit actually like in school day-to-day basis and I would go home and it all happened on Instagram.
Oh, that's just really so
Yeah, it's all in
psychologically
your phone, like
damaging.
in your home in your safe space. It's awesome. Anyway, I would think that like you probably got out with a less damaged sense of self.
Hmm.
I feel like you live more in reality than I have been able to. I feel like that's something I struggle with is like reality isn't this idealized version of everything that we put out. It's like a spectrum. And there's it's a whole sphere. It's not a plane that we're looking at. Like there's good and bad to everything. I feel like you probably had a easier time adjusting to the real world as you grew up, accepting things about you that maybe are perceived as negative or your shortcomings or whatever. Like, for example, something like that like I think me and a lot of other girls struggle with is like we don't look like that on Instagram. Like we're
Mhm.
not the Instagram baddie. Like my tits aren't good enough or like my ass isn't fat enough and stuff like that. And that makes me less than. And then we feel bad about ourselves all the time. I feel like maybe you would have just been like, this is what my tits look like, that's it. And like maybe you like compared yourself to other people for a little bit, but I feel like the exception that like being like, oh, I don't look like that. I feel like it might just end there. Like instead of being like constantly like bullying yourself for not looking a certain way or feeling like you're not worthy for not looking a certain way. Like I'm not saying you didn't have that experience at all. I just feel like that was probably a briefer or maybe you got through that developmental point earlier. Um and also I would think that like even now you I mean, I think it's a pretty generic thing to be like you live more in reality than I do, but I feel like what I mean by that is like I feel like my world is the entire world. Like I'm not I'm not just presenting myself to my community in Savannah, Georgia. I'm presenting myself to the globe and constantly continuing to present myself to everyone I've ever met that follows me.
Like you're a famous person.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, yeah. I
That's
mean,
what people
like,
feel like.
yeah. I
Everybody
mean,
feels like a famous person would, where everything has to be controlled and you have PR.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so I was talking about this with my boyfriend the other night about how, like, I feel so disconnected from the person I was before I lived here in Georgia when I was, a teenager in Arkansas and all of that. And I was like, I know that the people in my community now here in Georgia like see me, like me for who I am and all of that and are here with me now. But the people from Arkansas, like I had people who didn't like me in high school for good reason. I had, my little enemies or whatever. I had, people that were either like really with me or really against me, and they're all still watching me. And so it's like I can't escape whoever I was in the past by like moving away, by like leaving, like
Mhm.
physically going somewhere else. There's no actual like leaving anything behind in my life like that.
Yep.
Um and I feel like that's sort of where the discrepancy between what is real and what is not plays a big role. So that's I would think that that's less of an issue for you. I feel like
Yeah, I would say that's exactly right. Like when you were saying, being insecure about your body or being insecure about whatever. So, what I grew up with was Vogue, Cosmo, like all
mm,
these media images of really hot people, really skinny, really, really skinny people. really like it was like this is how to win a man, this is how to do all this stuff. So it was highly controlled by the media at the time, and we were all measuring ourselves against these determined guideposts of the public. Um, and of course, they're guideposts that are making profit off of you and all of these things. We were exposed to these rom-coms with these absolute fantasy relationships.
Mm.
We weren't comparing against each other as much as we were all comparing to whether we met these things. And then we were comparing against each other whether what level we were meeting these things. But what so the insecurities were rampant. I would say in some levels they were even more cruel because we didn't have body positivity, because we didn't have sexuality positivity. I mean, being a lesbian was the worst thing you could ever be. Um, uh, uh, Being fat was even worse. Just all of these things were so harsh. The rules were like celebrity level looks and life.
Yeah.
And so there wasn't a little bit of freedom to be like, oh, I only have to be as cool as Ashley. But and these are much more if you take the right photos, if you find some hot guy to get in them, like it's a more attainable experience than what we were presented was going to be the future of our lives that we had to live into, that we had to look like. However, the key thing I think that causes me to feel like really secure in self-esteem, moving forward, maturing, is that everything ended. It was erased. Like there's no mementos of my insecurities. There's no, like, there are pictures from in high school, and they're like physical photos that are somewhere that are hard to find, of like me in a bathing suit that I'm embarrassed about. Or there are things that'll like take me right back to those insecurities. But in a sense, old selves die away and are forgotten.
That does not happen.
Exactly. And one of the things that I think psychologically is known to be kind of important for healing and self-esteem and sense of identity is the ability to let the past behind. So you're not defining yourself by things that happened to you. You're not defining yourself by ways that you showed up, how weird you were in fifth grade. Like, you are every day kind of a new person with new opportunities and new ability to be completely new. And so I think you are frozen. It's almost like you're melded with your past selves, your failures, your insecurities, and they're all at all times, not just in some drawer somewhere in your mom's house, but like
They
in
follow
front
you.
of everywhere. They follow you. And even if you untag yourself, somebody still has you tagged on their profile or whatever it is.
I'm like to this day embarrassed of things that I did, that I experienced in high school, because they still follow me. And it's like, it's not just stuff where it's like, oh, when I visit home, some random person mentions it to me. It's like, I get messages about it online or something, like, remember when whatever, or, like there are lots of pictures from that time. And, social media is forever. There's pictures of me in places on other people's accounts that are there forever, that are going, they could leave them up if they want, and I can like delete things, but nothing ever really goes away, which is like a crazy concept.
And I think it would require a lot of active reprogramming of yourself to recognize that even an old thing of you, I mean, celebrities must do this all the time, right? Like an old version of you is not you, even if other people still see it within a continuum.
Yeah, that is not a connection I have.
Yeah,
that is a very difficult thing to
really work on that. I mean, I think
I'm like, I need to go to therapy.
Yeah, I mean, I think like everyone your age needs to. The other thing, though, I will put a little bit of a sliver of hope for you is that as we age, in general, people are less likely in their, let's say, late 30s, early 40s to be like, oh my God, I still remember when you fell on your face at that party, or like, oh my God, I remember when you thought you were pregnant and you weren't, and it was so embarrassing. Like, people don't do that. So the immature behaviors are like magnified.
Yeah.
by this, but I think there is hope for a new relationship for social media for between yourself and your social media to occur over time.
Yeah.
And your peers will probably get on board with that a little bit more too over time. So that might be a little hopeful. I mean, that might be a little real hope for you, but it would, think it would require some serious like intention to change that relationship to it.
Yeah. I mean, definitely something where it's like I would have to work with my mental relationship with my past self or
Yes.
whatever. And like, yeah, it's kind of like the people that I follow from like middle school and high school. Like, I'm seeing them, but I've always constantly seen them on my feed or whatever. So they've never left my mind. They've never left my mental space. And then to me, in my mind, they're still the way they were when they were 11 and 12.
Right. This is the thing. Well, I mean, do you ever unfollow these people?
No, I want them to see me and see how hot and sexy I got after middle
All our
school.
choices have a cost. But I would highlight that you do have some options for making profiles private, blocking people, hiding people, all of those things. But the thing is, that is a social interaction. When you, God forbid, you block someone, when you unfollow someone, like they will notice,
They will
depending on who they are,
notice,
and
and
it's like
sometimes
an
they
active
say
war. Yeah.
something.
So, or then they might bully you in some other group or whatever. So there are some things about that. Again, I think as one matures, that's less likely to happen,
Yeah.
except among people who are like absolute trash humans.
Yeah.
Okay. Amazing. So, what's another question you have for me?
Another question for you. I would like to talk a little bit more about dating, I guess. I would say, what do you think like my priorities are when I'm looking for a partner, choosing a partner? What do I hope to have in like a long-term relationship type person?
Um, okay, so I do know you
We
enough. We talk about dating a lot.
do.
I think you want someone who accepts you for your full self. I think you want someone who is emotionally available, somebody who understands things like um, lack of opportunity, like who isn't too privileged, right? And who is down to earth. I think you probably secretly, we all have a secret list of things we'd like in someone. I think your secret list is probably that they are really hot or hot enough that you feel proud of them on social media or in life. That's pretty common.
Yeah.
But and that like maybe they are cool. I think you would want something, and I mean I know you're in a relationship, so we'll just pretend that this is like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
whatever. Um, but that there's something about them that's cool. They have a cool factor. They have an interesting factor. They have like some aspect of them that's like, oh, no one else has this boyfriend, which we won't get into. But so
It's
anyway,
really funny that you say that.
but yeah, so that's what I would think you kind of look for in a partner. But I know that you've talked about this a little bit more, but like in the past, you talked about an option for you might be having a platonic friend that was your partner, and then having
Yeah.
dating relationships that were separate, which I'm sure is some feelings on that have changed. But the fact that that was an option you were thinking about,
I still think about it.
kind of, yeah. I mean, so yeah, that's what I think.
It's very interesting. Um, can I say like what I think is like ideal for you? Like, can
Yeah,
we do this
sure,
back and forth and then
sure.
say, I feel like for you, like, can I say that you're poly? Like that you,
Yes.
okay, you're polyamorous. So I know you get your needs met and everything. I feel like it would take someone being like a whole lot of man or woman to convince you to commit to like a monogamous relationship, or not even necessarily that, but to go to the level of like marriage, be it like an open marriage or something like that. I think that a lot of people are like, especially like millennials and also generations before you, are like, they just have to be my best friend. Like, obviously,
Mhm.
like they have to be attractive. I would suppose at your age, you're definitely looking for someone successful. But at the same time, I know that, like, again, being poly, that's like, I feel like if you fell like crazy in love with like a server, like a waiter or something, like you would be okay with that.
Mhm.
You personally. I imagine that you want to be with someone who, maybe is open to having a family but isn't like pressing on it. Maybe they would rather have dogs or something like that. But in general, someone who's like pretty emotionally intelligent, is going to like be there for you and like stick with you through thick and thin. Like if you got cancer or something, I feel like you'd want to be assured that they're never gonna leave or something. But yeah, overall's your best friend. Um, that's more generic. Like, what do I think it would take for you to marry someone? I know you answered like general partner for
No,
me,
no,
but
but that's wow. This happened in the first episode I did as well, which is like, oh God, I did not expect. You never expect how well people are going to answer for you. So I wow, the best friend thing. I'll talk to that. I'll talk about that for a second
Mhm.
because that is interesting as a generational thing. That I guess maybe you guys are less focused on that, but millennials definitely are focused on that. People will talk about that all the time. I just want them to be my best friend. I want
Yeah, and
that
that's all that I've
companionship.
heard about like millennials that I know who are engaged or older Gen Z who are engaged. They're like,
Mhm.
oh, well, they're my best friend. Or like they say, like, they just need to be your best friend. You'll know because they're your best friend. And for me personally, I'm like, my parents are best friends and their relationship has always been awful. I'm very happy that like they feel a connection with each other that's like best friendship, something that they haven't felt like maybe with any other person before or any other like person of the opposite sex before. But for me, I'm like, it's a bonus if we're best friends.
Interesting. So I would say on that point, I think that the my personal opinion is that you would want a partner to feel like a close friend, best friend kind of
Yeah.
thing, but not necessarily have to be your actual best friend. I
Yeah.
don't I mean I think that that's ultimately an experience that most people do kind of want to have or do
Yeah.
ultimately have because you build such intimacy with that
I mean,
person.
I've just always been told that like, oh, they're your best friend, that's your life partner. Like
Yeah, see,
it
so
doesn't
those are
matter.
not so one
But
does
those
not
aren't
cause the other
yeah,
for
those
sure.
aren't
So
for
so
yeah.
for example, you mentioned your parents. I'll just pretend that it's a random couple
Yeah.
who's like best friends, but they also and I know another couple that's close to me that like they have a sort of a best friendy vibe, but they also
Mhm.
have a toxic relationship.
Yeah.
So I think that the partnership part of it or the romantic part of it or all of those types of needs can be toxic while you still have this best friend kind of a thing because you've just developed such understanding of each other, knowledge of each other,
Yeah.
closeness. So I one does not beget the other. I would say that perhaps one of the reasons that the age thing is happening is not so much generational, except that I have heard that your generation kind of just doesn't even often there's news that you just don't even like pursue relationships a lot of the time. It's very hookup culture.
Mhm.
But I think as you do, what was it, as you get older, but as you do, you start to really value that presence of somebody who knows you. There was this, I think it was Susan Sarandon in the movie Shall We Dance or whatever. I remember this quote where she was like, uh, being married is like, or having someone is like a witness to your life. And I think that as you become more aware of maybe of your own mortality, of issues that come up, things like that, it feels really nice to have somebody who's like around and who just knows you and just
Mhm.
accepts you.
Yeah.
And so, but that does not a good relationship make per se. But I think at some point people start to long for that in a relationship. And those
Yeah.
relationships that were more like about the romance or more about the excitement or more about the dating and the experiences, if they don't make it into that realm, kind of do struggle a little bit more later when there's not options for excitement when somebody does have cancer, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I would say like also like your answer for me, like yeah, pretty spot on with everything that you said about what I'm looking for. I would say like my number one priority is emotional intelligence,
Yeah.
like and not in the TikTok Riz way where like I'm just saying that because I want to sleep with them or something or whatever. Whatever you were talking about.
Not the EQ guy.
Real
I see
EQ.
you.
I'm looking for someone who's very self-actualized, someone who like is in therapy or has been through therapy because I think everyone needs therapy. Someone who ideally is like successful or at least like has the drive within themselves that they're like, I take responsibility for my life. I take responsibility for my day. I wake up on a Tuesday. Tuesday's my responsibility. It's my job to make the most out of Tuesday. Like someone who um just believes that it's their job to make their future, and if they want something, they have to chase it. I'm in a relationship now. I really like that my partner, like, he's very into health and fitness because he's like thinking about, well, I want to still be like hiking mountains when I'm like late 60s, 70s, 80s, who knows? Like, and he's thinking about like longevity. He's like, I want to work on my relationships with people and like be very mindful of my socializing so I can make connections. He's like very interested in like, he's got a go getter mindset. I really want that because I really want to be with someone who pushes me to be a better person every
Mhm.
day, pushes me to like chase a successful future. And also in terms of like the therapy and EQ, like someone who challenges me and is like asking me always, or like not necessarily directly asking me, but makes me ask myself, like, how can I continue to heal? How can I continually improve and keep a good relationship with myself? How do I love myself and everything? Like, so yeah, just like a heavy focus on emotional intelligence and all that.
Yeah.
And like I value that, I think, way more than I value a best friendship situation. Like
Interesting, yeah.
I mean, like, I
Mhm.
grew up with my parents, like, since I was little, telling me, like, "Oh, you'll marry your best friend. Prince
Mhm.
Charming is your best friend," and stuff like that, but that's really difficult for me to believe when I know my parents are, like, in terms of humor and understanding each other, best friends, but otherwise, like, I frankly wish they would get a divorce. Like, I'm like, it's such a toxic relationship that they're both, I guess, willing to die for pretty much. Like neither of them want a divorce no matter how bad it gets. I also saw something that said like some married woman asked another married woman, like, how do you stay with your partner for so long and not get a divorce? And like the lady was said, it's easy, just don't get divorced. Like no matter what happens, just don't get divorced and then you will never be divorced. um, and I don't know, like I'm in a very interesting stage right now where I'm like, what do I actually want and need? I'm like, I have a best friend. Her name is Megan. Like, and I don't want to be, I don't think, with a woman in a marriage, like romantic relationship. And I also spoke about, yeah, like the concept of a life partner than having romantic relationships aside from that. It's something I've talked about. And I'm still open to that, but more than anything, like, I just think that you need more than a strong romantic relationship to have a happy family. And I
Mhm.
feel like a lot of people put way too much emphasis on just like, let's have a romantic relationship where we're best friends. And they think that makes everything right
Mm.
and not, actually putting in like significant emotional labor and thinking about like lining up of morals and values and how are
Mm.
we responsible for ourselves, instead of like let's take responsibility for each other and like merge our lives together. It's like, no, how are you responsible for yourself? How are you taking control of your own future and your own adulthood without expecting me to play any sort of role in that? Like how would you make it without me? Like, but I think I grew up around a lot of codependency as well. But
Right. So, I mean, it's interesting because a lot of the things like that I sometimes have aversion to the like merging of lives.
mhm,
I struggle with that, and then it's like parsing through. Okay, what part of this is like trauma or like things I'm trying to get past, and what part of it
mhm,
is real. But I mean, what you're saying really speaks a lot of truth that I think people don't think about a lot, which is that you see couples who like just kind of lounge on the couch and watch TV together, and they like move to the same places, and they do all this stuff, and they kind of are best friends, but
mhm,
again, that doesn't mean that, like, you're right, you don't have to be that kind of couple to have a healthy relationship
yeah,
when you have somebody who is challenging you to be a better self, who can think through
Mhm.
problems with you,
Yeah.
who's like able to share about their emotional experience and hold space for yours, who is like kind of helping you move forward in life, who really like sees you. I mean, I do think those things ultimately do, they are more important potentially than just that
Oh,
sense of like
yeah.
we only want to hang out with each other. I mean,
Yeah.
my grandmother, and let's hope she doesn't listen to this, she wouldn't be able to hear it, no offense grandma, but she's 97. She's awesome. There's a man in the rehab that she's in who thinks that she's his wife and he's obsessed with her. And I'm so proud of her for being so attractive. No, but she and my grandfather, who passed a couple years ago, he was not doing very well and she wanted to be with him all the time, and she didn't want to go out for lunches and have someone stay with him. She didn't want to, she just was like, oh, I just want to be with him, like we just want to be with each other. And I think that that is, I mean, that was her choice, and of course it's great and lovely and romantic that she wanted to be with her person, but she did miss out on, she no longer has the mobility that she did at that time. She
Yeah.
missed out on outings and lunches and friendships because she wasn't willing to sort of leave his side. And you could experience that as romantic, or you could experience that as tragic. However you
Mhm.
perceive it, she has her own experience of it. I don't think she's upset about it.
Yeah.
But it is interesting that a lot of times people like want that, like, oh, we do everything together and like we blah 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 blah, but that isn't necessarily what brings you to your highest self all the time.
Mhm.
So that's a really interesting point. And
Yeah.
then as far as me, like really what I'm looking for, I think there are so many aspects of myself that don't feel like they really like fit in with the experience of relationships that people often have, or they don't feel like they fit in
Mhm.
with just society in general or things like that, or the expectations of like my markers, my identity markers. So I think somebody who really just accepts that and like doesn't, isn't afraid of me,
Yeah.
which has happened, and is just anything I do is fine. But they still will call me out on stuff, or they still
Yeah.
will, you know, like, but it's also fine. So
Yeah.
I think like that's a really important aspect to me, and it's becoming more important to me. I used to be really focused on like, well, I want this other person to be doing some like amazing cool thing, or like they have this amazing ambition. I just dated artist after artist and all these things,
Mhm.
and now I do appreciate like a that the person has a bit of life stability, and primarily also because of their confidence stability. So for example, like if you have somebody who's just starting out in the world and they want to take on all of these things, like they're still dealing with a lot of esteem issues around their success and all of that, and then
Mhm.
they bring that to the table in your relationship, right? So I think I really appreciate somebody who's at least like, I'm kind of cool with what I'm doing in the world. For the most part, I might have some
Yeah.
insecurities. And then at the same time, just that's like able to also like let me run my fastest and still want to be there. So I think
Yeah.
that's kind of what I want in someone who, and I do want someone that doesn't leave me when I
Yeah.
have cancer.
Oh, yeah, of course. I also like something that I really admire about like you like being open to and continually like living your polyamorous truth, and like things that you've said to me about why you do it, or like you explained to me once that like when you're polyamorous, there's not a one person that you're holding up to like your like an impossibly high standard, or your personal standard of what your perfect partner should be. Or it's like it doesn't matter if they miss the mark on meeting your needs all the time, because you can always get your needs met by one of your other partners, and then you feel fulfilled by like a community basically, which I think is beautiful. And I think that I'm kind of like of the same mindset, that it's like I want, this kind of touches on what I said about life partner instead of like a romantic relationship. I think like what I really want is a strong community of people who understand me and see me. And it's like, I'm so down to have a best friend that isn't my husband or wife, and
Mhm.
like they stay separate from that area. But like, I want a life partner, which could be like husband and all that. But at the same time, like, I want other people to be in my life forever as well, in a very close capacity. Like my best friend Megan, she fills a lot of needs for me, and like she meets me in places where my boyfriend doesn't, and
Mhm.
I'm okay with that. I'm like, that's my best
That
friend.
would
That's
be a
that's
lot of
her
pressure
job.
on him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's an incredible person, like anyway. I don't expect anything more from him, frankly. Um, I don't know. I think I watched my parents grow up in a very isolating relationship where their worlds were each other and
Mhm.
everything are still each other. And I think like that's what I fear the most is that isolation with someone else. Um, and I think like the ability to like be polyamorous or like open your heart to multiple outlets of meeting your needs or being with multiple people who fulfill you in some way is really beautiful. But I'm also like, wow, the world is beautiful, life is beautiful, community is beautiful. But I think like it shouldn't just be about finding this one person to spend your whole life with. Like
Mhm.
that's it's cool to have a life partner and everything, but I think it also equally needs to be about like multiple people that you want to spend your life with. And
Yes.
they might not necessarily like live in the same house as you, let alone the same city, state, country. But
Mhm.
it's like there's people that like I feel like I'm always going to want in my life because they get me in a different way. They meet my needs in a different way that like other people haven't before. And so it's like I want my
Mhm.
best friend Megan to be a part of my life forever. And like maybe
Mhm.
my boyfriend now will be a part of my life forever. And there's people I've actually lost contact with. That I'm like, I would like you to be a part of my life forever still.
Mhm.
Um, and so it's like I feel like instead of like one life partner, I feel like a little life community would be beautiful. Is that me like am I just wanting a commune?
No, this is the reason communes exist because we all kind of on some level want this. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one more question for you.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and this is like sort of like like one of the fundamental questions I really did want to
Yeah.
know is do you feel like um millennial women are really trying to make your lives better? Or are we maybe like focused on ourselves? Or like, are we trying to move female rights forward for you? Do we care about you? Do we care about what happens to you?
To be honest, my personal view on it is like in terms of like rights and stuff and what happens and all of that, I feel like all of that in the current political climate is so on fire. It's like it's not even your fault.
Yeah.
Like I don't blame the generation above me for anything that they left because it's like a lot of y'all are also like just now becoming part of like office and whatnot and government control and stuff. It would be nice if like you showed up to vote and whatnot as a generation. It'd be nice if my generation showed up to vote and
I think
everything.
we might do a better job than y'all.
Yeah, true. But you know who does the best? The fucking boomers.
It's true.
So maybe like I know I'm a daughter of a political activist, and so I think like the best thing that like maybe your generation could be doing is more political activism. I feel like that's like something that my generation is very hard and heavy on.
Mm.
Like we're very politically like socially activists and stuff like that. We have a which sucks because we're bad at voting. But like I
Don't
feel
get
like
there.
I didn't see that from
Mm.
millennials growing up ever. Like I feel like the first time like it really like hit that all this was happening was like I mean the Black Lives Matter movement that happened during COVID was like huge. And I remember like growing up and like particularly like around when Obama left office, like I don't know if I just had the privilege of being unaware, but I felt like I had never seen people angry about such obvious things before. Like, I felt like we were all just kind of going through it. And, like, I had heard, like, oh, we make less, we make 78 cents to a man's dollar and stuff like that. And so I was, like, frustrated with that. And I saw politicians talk about that and I resonated with that. But then, like, when things started to feel like they were on fire, it felt very different. I was like, well, why weren't we talking about police brutality before? Why weren't we talking about like all these sort of I don't know about like women's stuff because I feel like rape statistics were probably a thing, but and like talking about women in the workplace was a thing, but it was like it didn't feel so immediate or like so desperate.
Urgent.
Yeah, like I felt like I had a lot of hope for the future and was like, oh, this will definitely get fixed in my lifetime or something like that. Not even in my lifetime, like this has to change the next few years, sort of thing. But then it was like, how can we even think about this when everything else is going on? The other point about like millennial women maybe letting us down is like, I feel like y'all maybe when you were younger could have been on a better track, but I feel like social media kind of ruined it. Because with your generation, we saw the birth of like pumpkin spice latte girl, yoga pants girl, Ugg boots girl, and like these sort of social typings that like were very damaging to the way that women were viewed. And I don't think that was necessarily like y'all really fucking up. I think that women have always kind of been put in those categories. But like when I first got on Instagram, that is what I was seeing was that sort of typecasting of women. And I feel like I mean, obviously, like, grew up on social media. I'm like, it's the worst thing that ever happened. So, like, social media kind of ruined it for everyone. Like, I don't know. I feel more like also millennial women and Gen Z women feel more against each other than with each other. I feel like y'all aren't like, come along, let's do this. There's a lot of like online like drama between millennial women and Gen Z women being like just fighting over stupid stuff, making fun of each other, and all of that. There's not a lot of generational, cross generational friendship going on, I don't think. I think that you personally do a fine job of that. But otherwise, with millennial women, I feel completely disconnected. I feel like they're ignorant, like they don't care about the right things. Like I don't I don't know. You also like inherited a different world than like my generation is inheriting, where things weren't like great, things weren't super secure, but it was better than it is now. And y'all got the economy left behind by the generation before you, which not the best, but you had a little bit more to work with. Um, I feel like being so young, millennial women haven't necessarily had the chance to like prove to us yet anything, set any sort of goal because millennials are still young. It's like y'all are starting families. Some of you are homeowners. A lot of you like are just now coming into the peaks of your career. Like, millennials in their 40s and stuff, like are getting to those high up positions and stuff like that. It's disappointing because I feel like I don't see enough of that. And that makes me scared for my future of being like, I feel like not enough young people are in any workplace or any positions of power, not necessarily like in government, but like CEOs of companies, managers, stuff like that. Like, I feel like there's not enough representation of younger people. Um, but I feel like again, like y'all still have plenty of time. I mean, you'll
Hmm.
always be the generation ahead of me. I'm only 23. Y'all are only in 30s and 40s.
Yeah. Wow, that's so interesting. I think like I can talk about my side of like the experience of Gen Z women. I think I had a hard time with Gen Z initially before I started making friends with you guys
Hmm.
because it's hostile. It felt like a hostile group of people that
Yeah,
like had resentments towards me and I didn't.
yeah.
I'm like, what did I do to you? Like, and it just felt like this cold, hostile group of people.
We're angry.
Yeah,
We're an
and
angry
it's not
generation.
welcoming.
No.
um, but at the same time, then it becomes this cycle because then we tease you and come up with things that are like, "Nah, nah,
Yeah.
nah," and we distance and maybe I think the answer to my like very direct question is I don't see my female counterparts around me talking about or doing anything to try to help you guys.
No,
I
I don't
think
have any like besides you, I don't have any like female guidance that I'm looking
yeah,
towards.
I think now there, like you said, our generation is becoming mothers or becoming mothers at this point, also of even like
Or
teenage daughters.
yeah, or coming into their careers like the
Right.
peaks that that's the
So
first time.
we're starting to be the mentor figure, we're starting to be the mother figure, we're starting to have like some
Hmm.
clout. There is some point to be made that like in your 20s is kind of your selfish phase.
Yeah.
in your self-obsessed phase, and
Yeah.
like you think that the world revolves around your generation in your 20s. So like,
Yeah.
oh, these new kids, ha ha ha, and these old people don't matter at all, and like
Yeah.
we are the future. And then you're like 10 years later, you're like, oh, we're not future anymore. And it's so obnoxious to see people that think they're the future. And it's like, you don't have that much time of being the future. Everybody thinks that they're going to be the future until they're like 80. And it's like, no, you've
Yeah.
got like maybe 7 more years. So it's just so funny because we are trained and programmed to live in a world that we only live in for maybe 5 years of our adulthood, and then the world completely changes and we're
Yeah.
irrelevant. Our programming is irrelevant. The way we move through the world is irrelevant. What we care about is irrelevant. And especially in today's world, like it's just so rapidly changing. I think what happened with our generation is in many ways millennials were attacked on multiple sides. We
Yeah.
had like these hopes. I think it did feel for a long time like, oh, women are going to get ahead and all these things are going to happen, and
Yeah,
then
that's what I saw. Like,
and it sort of felt like we didn't actually have to work for it, because everything
yeah.
felt like, oh yeah, you are going to be successful and you are going to be
Yeah.
these things, and we got a lot of false promises. But also the world was going in a better direction, and then things outside of anyone's control on some level, and then also things that were the control of people that came before and people from the outside, and whatever inside you're in, like affected the world that we lived in. And now everyone's kind of scrambling to pick up the pieces. And I think there's a bit of trauma from that and reeling from that and just trying to like re-find your footing. But I think like we were part of a world that we thought was going to be really exciting
Hopeful
and hopeful, and we wouldn't have to do anything, like it was just happening. And then
Yeah.
these things happened, and I think we're just like almost traumatized by the shock of the change. Whereas you guys like almost have this like dystopian viewpoint already. And so I think we're still kind of like reeling from that, like almost like from a last adulthood. And then like we almost like don't have capacity to take care of you guys.
I feel like I don't know what your generation could have done for my generation.
I mean, I
like,
do
I don't
appreciate
know,
that, but yeah, I don't know. I think what hurts me right now is looking at that we are still fairly, as millennial women, we are very victimy. We
Mm.
are very victimy about how men are. We're very victimy about like all just all sorts of things. And I think we need to move into a place where we're starting to reach out to people who are younger and older than ourselves, where we're starting to be like, I can change the world that I live in. Like I
Oh my
can
God,
live
yeah.
by new rules.
That's what I was gonna say. Is like I feel like that's like I don't know if it's a difference between our generations, but also I was saying like, talking about looking for a partner who's pushed me further and further and stuff like that. It's like you maybe had this false sense of security. Things seemed like they were going in a different direction. The political sphere was completely different from what it is now. And it's like I feel like my generation is like we have to do everything ourselves. Nothing is coming to us. We don't have any promise of ever owning a home. We barely have a promise of being able to afford rent, depending on where we live. There's shitty health care. We came into a post 9/11 world with terrorism. I mean, growing up, like, I remember, like, well, I don't remember 9/11. I was a baby during 9/11, but I remember constant terrorist attacks and stuff, like the Boston Massacre and stuff like that. That's things I genuinely fear. My boyfriend was talking about wanting to do the Boston Marathon one day, and my mind goes straight to the bombing, and not thinking about, oh, Boston Marathon, you have to qualify for that. That's so cool, blah, blah, blah. Like, I think of like someone blew that up. I think about, when I associate traveling with people bringing bombs on planes, I associate it with disappearing in a foreign country, being raped, and like, or sex trafficked or something like that. Like, there is, I feel like there's no magic. Like, I mean, the world is a magical place
Did
to
you
me.
ever feel like there was magic?
Oh, well, when I was younger, I mean, yeah, I
When you
think
were
when
a
I,
little child?
yeah. Well, and I still think there is in terms of like everyday life. Like the world is still beautiful to me. Community is beautiful. Family, love, it's all beautiful.
Yeah.
I just mean like there's no hope for my generation of really like
It's rock
again,
bottom.
like yeah, it's rock bottom. Like there's no housing. there's no promise of ever having the ability to afford a family. Like, I don't know that I'll ever be able to have kids because I can't imagine affording that. Like, I know how much I've costed my parents to
Mhm.
live and be supported by them in my life. And I'm like, with the income that is being promised to me, I'm like, I don't think I can afford to have children because I feel like by the time maybe I do make it to a place where I can have kids, I'm going to be in menopause. Like, I'm going to be outside
Yeah,
my
and
window.
yeah. What's interesting is that you're describing a world that I also live in, but
Well, you're still young enough to be experiencing that too.
everybody, everybody is I mean, people who have kids aren't having that problem, but the idea of like, I still think I might get, I don't want to go to the Boston Marathon, so all of those things that you guys are kind of facing in early adulthood, it's like a very like dark sense of future. I think what we're
We
struggling
experienced that
with.
as children.
Right, but I think what we're struggling with, and that's like sort of this terrible thing, but I think what we're struggling with is just like 25 years of thinking you would live in a movie. Like
Yeah.
25 years of never imagining that Roe v. Wade could be repealed. Like 25 years of thinking you were going to break the glass ceiling of life being full of magic and luxury and future, and we would have our passions. And the most important thing was just that you could fricking figure out what your passion was so that you could be famous at it. I mean, it was like that was all
That
we
is
cared about in
not a
college,
thing.
was just what is your passion? What's your thing? This is your future. And like now that's not a thing. People worked so hard because we just knew that if you put in the work, then it would be this.
That's
And
the
for a
American
while,
dream.
well, we were the American dream. And for a while that was real until
Yeah.
it wasn't. It's not that we just lived in fantasy. People were having those lives. People before us were having those lives. People were having those lives at the time. Like
Yeah.
it was a beautiful life. And then it feels like we got put into a war zone, and even things that felt so secure for us, even things like our sense of femininity or our sense of relationships or whatever, are just falling apart. And if you haven't caught that like precious family life or whatever that you really want at this
Yeah.
point, you almost have no chance of finding it anyway. And like it's a little bit traumatic.
Yeah. I feel like y'all definitely experienced the trauma side of that. My generation never had the hope at all of any
Yeah,
of that
which
because,
is
like,
really dark.
yeah, I don't know. I'm like, my dream is like, my dream, like, of course I dream like I'll be rich and I'll, maybe I'll have a family and like all this sort of stuff that you talked about. But like a dream of mine that I'm like nervous of if I'll ever attain it is just like a small house that I own in a dinky little neighborhood. Maybe I think about, I'm from Arkansas. I'm like one of the small houses in the sort of middle class part of town. Like maybe I can get one, but I know the shoddy ones that really need to be fixed up are still like 300 to 400,000. And it's like my job, like the thing I've majored in, like I'll frankly never make enough money to afford even that. And so it's kind of just hoping that something will change. And also it's like, yeah, this sort of idea, like I talked about again, relationship thing earlier, where it's like there's no promises of anything. You sink or swim, and you have to teach yourself how to swim. And you have to decide that you're going to try to swim. You have to realize that you have to teach yourself how to swim, And I feel like that's a very difficult thing to do at such a young age, especially when everything feels so hopeless.
Yeah. It's like so painful because again, the world that we lived in was real. So it's almost like, are you really
Yeah.
going to live in a world where there's no gold, where there's no Disney, where there's no, like, are you really, I mean, those things obviously exist now, but
Yeah.
they're lost. Like that's sad.
I know
But
people.
also here's the thing is once you hit rock bottom, and I think maybe that's why your generation is more activists, it's like you have no choice but to
But
pursue going up. And I
yeah,
think what
get
I would
angry.
say to our generation is like, it's time for us to heal from the whiplash and
Yeah.
actually start doing something to move forward in the new world we're in. Like, we need to come to a
Swim.
place of acceptance. This is
Mhm.
not the same life we were promised. This is not the same future. all of our dreams have died. So who are you going to be now? Like, what are we going to do now? What are we going to do for the future we're put in? And like, how can we create magic again, even in the light of a crazy world, right? Like, we all assume it's going to be the worst possible scenario, but again, you start to see people kind of rising up and being like, no, we're going to have this kind of a future and all of that. So I think, like, yeah, I think we need to get out of our whiplash. I think it would help if we were received more warmly by other generations. Um,
We'll get over
and
it soon. We'll
yeah,
think you're cool and
we
like give
will
us like 3
eventually.
more
Well,
years.
and we were mean to Gen Xers. I mean,
It's every generation thinks the
hates
generation
the one
above them
before.
is
But
yeah.
the one thing I have to say about Gen Xers is that they really did, like, those women really did move our rights forward a
Mhm.
lot, and they did a lot in the workplace, and they put in a lot of that, like, effort in which, like, now
Yeah.
we could walk in and have better opportunities and actually be the SVP and not the VP and all of
Yeah.
that, right? But they did still, the criticism of them is that they did still kind of like live within a man's world as
Mhm.
well. But again, that was because they were, so it's all like a thing. But I always looked up to them because I wanted to be them, because we were taught to be all
Yeah.
the celebrities. And then two, I'm starting to be like very appreciative of how hard it is to have been born into one world and then have to reckon with another.
Yeah, I think like the interesting thing your generation is facing is like, yeah, you came into this world that felt like it had a lot of promises. And again, like no one ever thought that Roe v. Wade would be overturned or anything like that. And I think what's really discouraging is like, yeah, the women of like Gen X and all that made all these strides for women's rights, civil rights, all that sort of stuff. And then our generations have both seen that taken away.
Go away.
Yeah, and it's like my generation has watched it happen before we ever had the opportunity to even think
Do
that we could
anything
do
about
anything.
it.
Whereas
Mhm.
yours, so we're kind of like, this is just life, this is how it works. And we see like what was maybe once like a good country where you could pursue your dreams. We've seen it kind of fall apart. And like I feel like, oh, that's just something that they told us in elementary school so that we would pursue careers or whatever.
Mm.
But like that's not real. But yeah, I would think it's very discouraging to see like, oh, well, they tried and they succeeded, but it all got taken away anyway.
Yeah,
So like, what's the point?
it's
Where's
really
where's the
interesting
hope?
because I can imagine that when you're younger, you can't do anything about it, so you're looking to elders to do something about it, and you perceive when you're a kid, the people in their 20s or even 18-year-olds
Mhm.
are adept at things, capable of things, evolved at things, mature enough to do anything but worry
Yeah,
about their own survival and futures.
yeah,
And so I can see how one might feel betrayed without the awareness, just like when you learn about your parents and you're like, oh my God, they were my age when they had me, they were children in a sense.
yeah.
Like, you
I'm like, my
forget,
mom was 24 and she got married. That's a child bride.
right? You forget that the people that you think could do something still were like reeling from entering adulthood and figuring out, like, wait, this isn't available anymore, and still in their selfish phase. So
Yeah.
wow, this has been amazing. Like,
Very fun.
more powerful than I could have ever expected. Um, so anyway, thank you so much, Lori, and you're such a good friend to have. I'm so grateful
Thank you
for you
for
in
having
my
me on. I'm
life.
very flattered.